of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to today's Tivoli User Community Ask the Expert series. In today's session, our expert speaker, Christina Grimes, will discuss Netcool OMNIbus backup and recovery. Today's webcast is interactive, so you may ask a question at any time using the chat window or the raise hand button located in the control panel. Today's session is being recorded, and you will be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Christina. Take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, I'm Christina Grimes. I'm a senior engineer. I've been supporting Netcool OMNIbus for about 10 years now. If you've ever opened an OMNIbus PMR, I've probably worked with you before. In today's session, I'll be discussing OMNIbus core backup and recovery. For the agenda, I'll discuss the important directories and files for a system backup. We'll look at the deployment engine registry backup, installation manager backup, and then we'll look at the different options for an object server database backup. For a system backup, it's always best on both Unix and Windows if you can back up the entire NC home directory. On Unix, you can back up certain directories, so there's a listing of the directories here that you would need. On Windows, it's not just the NC home location, you would also need a backup of the Windows registry, since a lot of OMNIbus information is stored there as well. And here's a listing of the Windows directories at a minimum that you would have to back up for a system backup. On OMNIbus 730, 731, and 740, you should also take a deployment engine registry backup before and after any installations. The deployment engine keeps a registry of all your installed products. If you take a backup before and after any installation, you'll always have a good copy of your registry in case you ever need to restore it. If there's any deployment engine problems, we can always reinstall deployment engine, but we can't recreate the registry itself. So it's good to have a backup of the registry. Also with deployment engine, if you do a fix pack installation, you can't uninstall a fix pack. The best way to roll back a fix pack with the deployment engine is to back up your whole NC home directory and back up your deployment engine registry, and then to restore both the NC home directory and the deployment engine registry at the same time. So the commands here list your DE backup DB command and your DE restore DB command. The files that are created are very small, so it doesn't take much size at all. But you should have a backup file location.
Christina, we have a question here.
Okay, go ahead, Wade.
It looks like our Windows servers, do we need system state or only the registry?
On Windows servers, I believe it's only the registry that you would need to back up for OMNIbus. I don't think that it would store anything on the system state. Does that answer your question? Okay.
It does. Thank you. Oh, another question.
Okay.
Does anything need to be down to do this? On AIX, we do a ESM Inc. daily. So I am debating running the above commands also. Opinions on that?
Yes, you can take a backup when everything is running. At the end of this, I'll be going over the object server database backup. So the object server, you have to back up more than just the running files because it's always writing to the object server database. So you should also be taking a separate object server backup and then backing up that backup rather than just backing up the running object server. So it's both the system backup and the object server backup, and you can back up those object server backup files as part of the system backup too. And the reason for that is just that the object server is always writing to those database files. And if they get backed up kind of out of order, it could corrupt the database, so you can't restart it. Okay. On Omnibus 8.1, we move to the Installation Manager for installs. And there are two separate directories that you should back up for Installation Manager as well. So there is an IM shared directory and a data agent directory. And you should back these up before any installations. The Installation Manager does let you roll back. So if you ever do a 6-pack install, different than Deployment Engine, you can do a rollback feature to uninstall it so you don't have to restore your NC home directory. But it's a good idea to back up these registries because just like Deployment Engine, if we can reinstall Installation Manager, but we can't recreate that registry easily.
Okay, Christina, we have a couple more questions. We have a hand raised. Frederick, I've unmuted you. Would you like to ask the question? Hello, Frederick, did you still have the question?
I think he lowered his hand.
I think he did. Okay. There are also questions in the chat.
Okay. Let me see. Our general position is that everything is on its own VG. So when we need to restore something, we would restore that entire VG that contains NC home. That way, it's all at the same point in time. Would that be viable? It is. You can definitely restore your whole NC home directory. You still want to have that object server backup separate. So you don't want to just rely on the Omni Home DB directory to restore your object server. You need to do a separate object server backup and have regular backups of that into a different directory. And then you could back up those object server database backups with your backup as well. You could also do the Deployment Engine or the Installation Manager install directory and back that up at the same time. Does that answer your question? Oh, there's some comments here also. For TSM, you might prefer a pre-scheduled task to be defined in the DSM sys, or as we do, run a pre-backup task. And it makes it all visible in TSM. So at the end of this, I go over some of the different methods to back up the object server database. We'll do a demo on enabling the automatic backup trigger. I would recommend the automatic backup trigger with the TSM backup just because it's going to back up at a regular interval. So you can set the interval that it backs up at. And then you could do your TSM backup and have it scheduled after that. So the Installation Manager, the backup directories are the Data Agent directory and the IM Shared directory. The Data Agent directory would go into your Installation Manager installer, IBM Installation Manager Eclipse configuration. You should back up that entire directory. The IM Shared directory is chosen at install time, so it can be different depending on what you choose when you install Omnibus for the first time. You can search for IBM IM Shared is the name of the directory. And for example, on my install, it's under my installer IBM IM Shared. So if you ever need to restore when you have the Installation Manager, you can restore the NC Home directory, the IM Shared, and the Data Agent directories at the same time. But as I mentioned, Installation Manager is better in that it has a rollback option. So before doing a manual restore, it's better to try to use that rollback feature. So that covers the Deployment Engine and the Installation Manager installer backups. Now I'm going to move to the object server backups. So first there's two methods that you can do an export of the object server, and you could use these to back up the object server as well. And those are NCO Compact and NCO OS report. I just wanted to talk about some of the differences between them. Why would you look at using one versus the other? They both have their own use cases, so it depends on what you're going to be using them for. So NCO Compact, and this has been around in all versions of OMNIbus, is used to export and import, and it does it into a jar file. The difference is the import merges the data with the existing data in the object server. It does not completely clone the object server. So if you have an object server that already has some triggers and data in it, it merges in the new data with it, so it's not an exact clone always. Also, NCO Compact does not back up any event data at all. You can't use it to back up alerts.status events or any other event data. NCO Compact is useful for exporting specific configurations. So if you want to export something in particular, like all of your users, so that you have a backup of all of your users, you can do that very easily through NCO Compact. It's really useful for that.
We have a couple more questions.
Okay, go ahead, Wade.
Yeah. Well, it looks like one is just a comment. It would be great to have the point about the rollback added to the slide where the backup is identified. And Gary asks, do either of these backups lock the database? If so, for how long?
Okay. For the first comment, I can add that rollback comment to that slide. I'll do that before I send them out. And do these backups lock the database? It doesn't lock the database, but it can keep the object server busy. These NCO Compact and NCO OS report run very quickly. I've never seen them lock the object server out for any amount of time. The database backup, if it runs very frequently, and I'll show you that the default is for a 5-minute backup, that I have seen it where it can make the object server very busy during that backup time. The NCO Compact and the NCO OS report, they usually run in very quickly in a minute or two. The other method that we'll look at, which does a complete backup of the database files, it should also run in under 5 minutes. Okay, NCO OS report. This was added in OMNIbus 7.3.1. So if you have OMNIbus 7.3.0, you won't have access to NCO OS report. And what this does is it exports your object server into SQL files. If you remember OMNIbus from way back in OMNIbus 3.5, you'd remember that when you shut it down, it would actually write SQL files. It would write everything out in SQL. This is similar to that in that it exports it into about 5 or 6 SQL files. And you can use those SQL files with the NCODB init command during object server creation to clone the object server. And this is very nice because it does an exact clone of that object server. And you can use it for backing up your entire object server. It's also useful if, say, you want to copy one particular trigger from one object server to another. You could run NCO OS reports. You could go look in the automation SQL file that's created, and you could copy that trigger SQL, and you could copy it over and run on your other object servers too. And if you don't have any backup at all, if you aren't doing any backup methods and you have a problem with your object server where it won't start up, you can use NCO OS report to clone your object server. So you could clone, if you have a backup object server, you could use NCO OS report to clone your backup into a primary, or to clone your primary into a backup. I have another question. Does it back up the tools and menus? Both NCO Compact and NCO OS report back up the tools and menus. With NCO Compact, you can use I'll go into more detail in a couple slides, but you can use the list option. So if you wanted just to do tools and menus, you could do just tools and menus with NCO Compact also.
There's another question as well.
Okay, to back up IBM IM, the installation manager, is there a script that is supposed to be ran, or you use Linux or Windows tools or commands? There isn't a script to run with the installation manager. They just recommend backing up these two directories. So it's not really a separate command to run. It's just everything that's within these directories. Okay, now let's look into more detail. I wanted to show how NCO Compact and NCO OS report can be used. So this is the command for NCO Compact to do an export. And this would, you have to do this on a running object server. So you would connect it to the NCOM's object server, and it would export everything into this package. You can use it with the list option. So this package name is menu tools. You could use it with the list option to export a subset of the object server database. So in the list option, it creates a file that has all of the different components that you can export, and you can pick and choose what you would like to export. For example, you could choose to your menus and tools, or you could choose just to export your users. It can be very handy also if you want to copy or just users only from one system to another. You could do a NCO Compact export and then copy them to the other system. The one thing you have to worry about with NCO Compact is it does a merge, not an exact copy or clone. So if you do copy some things like your users, you have to make sure that the user IDs remain the same. And then the restore command is you run NCO Compact with an import against that same file, and you would run it against a running object server. What happens if you have conflicting UID or GUID when importing? Usually the NCO Compact will print an error message, and it might fail to import if you have a conflicting user ID or group ID. You can use a -force option at the end of it if you get an error, and sometimes it will continue on. Sometimes you have to go in and manually delete that user ID or group ID and then import again. And here's an example for NCO OS report. The backup command is you run NCO OS report. The DBinit is the default against the server, and you would run it against a running object server as well. The restore command would be, it's really an object server recreation is what it does. So the object server can't be running when you do the NCO DBinit command. What it's doing is creating a new object server using the same SQL data from the original object server. So in the restore command, the object server would have to be down. If you're restoring an already existing object server, you would have to add a -force option to the end of it, so it would overwrite the data that's already there. And within this, there are two options, alerts data and alerts data file. And these actually will copy in all of the alerts data from the original object server as well, all of the alert status, alerts journal, alerts details, and trees. And they will import the object server data. If you don't want the object server data, you can leave those options off of the NCO DBinit command. And you can use NCO OS report to clone object servers across systems. I prefer NCO OS report just because NCO Compact, because it does the merge, it can error out if the object servers aren't exactly the same, or if there's some data that it can't merge in. Where the NCO OS report, you know it's always doing an exact clone of what was in the original. There's a question in the chat. We could still use NCO OS report from a remote OMNIbus system to connect to, say, 731 and create the SQL files. Yes, you can. And NCO OS report was added in 731, I believe. It's just not in 730. But you can, if you have another, say, 8.1 or 7.4 system, you could connect to an object server of a lower version and use it to export.
And we have another question about, does the server name need to be the same as the original?
No, it doesn't. You can create it with any server name that you want to. And the last backup method here is doing an automatic object server database backup. So what this does is creates like a snapshot of the object server. So it creates an exact backup of your object server. It's the same database files that your object server uses, and it will put them into any directory that you want. You might already be familiar with the alter system backup command, which you can issue from NCO SQL or the SQL interface. And it's the same command that the automatic backup trigger runs. So all it does is it backs up your entire object server. It's the exact object server into two files, the masterstore.tab and the tablestore.tab. And if you ever need to restore from those files, you would have to stop the object server and you would replace all of the contents of the OmniHomeDB object server name. It's always good to take a backup of that directory before you replace it. And you replace the contents with the masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab files that were the backup files.
We have a couple questions in the chat. How far back is it compatible? I'm not sure of that, but I don't believe it exports all the way back to 7.2. And then we have another question after that.
Okay. I don't think I've ever tried using NCO OS report against 7.2. I know I've tried using it against 7.3.0, and it works against 7.3.0, but I don't think that I've tried it against 7.2.0 or 7.2.1. It might work, but I haven't tested it. And then there's another question. Can you clone an object server created on 7.4 or earlier into an 8.1 or later using NCO OS report? You can copy an object server using NCO OS report, or you can even use this alter system backup command and copy these masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab files into your new system. You still have to do one additional step, though, to upgrade the object server schema. So whenever you're switching version, there's always update to SQL files that will apply all of the SQL updates between versions. So even if you're copying over the object server with either of these methods, you need to apply those update SQL schema changes into the object server database to upgrade it. So let's look at a demo of the automatic backup trigger. This trigger is disabled by default, so you have to enable it if you want to do any automatic backups. The group is enabled, and there are several triggers that help with automatic backup. Backup failed, backup state integrity, backup succeeded, but the only one you really have to configure and enable is the automatic backup trigger. The other ones are enabled by default. And there was one more question. Is that a valid update path taking the backup from a 7.4 to an 8.x? Yes, doing a normal upgrade from 7.4 to 8.x, you do have to install 8.1 into a new directory. If you're doing it on the same system, it will automatically copy over your object server database files, your masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab, and then you have to use those update SQL files against it. If you're doing it across two systems, which is usually the case, it's usually two separate systems, and you have 7.4 on one and 8.1 on the other one, then you have to manually copy that over. So you can either do the NCO OS report, or you can do the alter system backup, which is what this trigger does as well, to create the masterstore.tab, tablestore.tab, and then copy those files over.
There's another question as well. Excuse me. How can we restore the backup with existing alarm in the object server. So it restores all alarms plus new alarms. I guess you're asking how to do a restore without wiping out anything that's already there?
Yes, that sounds like it. That will be trickier. So you could try using NCO OS report. I haven't done this, but NCO OS report does back up everything into SQL files. So you could take an NCO OS report backup of both object servers. Then you could either use that NCO OS report to create a new object server from one system. So you take an NCO OS report, the full one, to create a new object server. And then you could copy over just the alerts data SQL file. A lot of the SQL files is valid SQL commands that you can run in the object server. So you could try to run that alerts data SQL file from NCO SQL to populate in those old alarms. I haven't tried it, but the alerts data SQL file just has a lot of inserts within it. It wouldn't be an exact copy because it would, again, be, you'd clone the original object server, but those new alarms, you'd have to insert them somehow. There's one more comment in here that someone used NCO OS report on a 7.0 object server to upgrade to 7.3.1. Well, thank you. That's good to know that it works on 7.0 even. Okay, let's go back to the automatic backup trigger. So this is a trigger that by default runs every 5 minutes. I would not suggest running it every 5 minutes. I have seen in one case where there was an object server that had, almost 100,000 events, and running this at a 5-minute interval just about locked the object server because it was trying to create the backup too frequently. So I would suggest changing this to maybe a 24-hour interval. Maybe you would want to back it up at least once a week or something that would not cause any performance problems. Every 5 minutes is really too frequent. So I'm just going to change this to run every 24 hours. We would have to enable it also. Here in the action, there are two things that you need to be aware of. First is the number of backups created. So here you can, by default, create 2 backups. You can set it to create as many backups as you want to, and it will not create backups indefinitely. It creates 2 backups, and then it will delete the oldest backup every time it creates a new one. And also, it backs up to this directory path. Before you enable the trigger, you have to make sure that this directory path exists and that it's writable by the object server user. So it uses OmniHome, backup, and then your object server name, and then it creates a file that starts with backup underscore. And within this directory, it will create a masterstore.tab and a tablestore.tab file. So make sure that you create that directory first and that it's writable by the user. Then you just say OK. And then check the directory to make sure that the file is being written. To get an idea of your backup size for the automatic backup trigger, it is larger because it is doing a whole copy of your object server database. So you can look at your OmniHome DB object server name directory. And let me show you that. So here I've created my OMNIbus backup NCOMS directory, and this is where it's going to create my masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab files. Now the running object server is under the OmniHome DB directory, and there's a separate directory under here for every object server. So if you look at the running object server, you can see that it has a lot more files than the masterstore.tab and the tablestore.tab, and that's because it's continuously writing to this directory and it's merging in information. So if you do a file system backup, you don't want to just back up this DB directory. You need to have a different method to back up your object server database. And that's because if you look at these date stamps, your tab files, the masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab, are only written whenever you do a graceful object server shutdown. So if you back up this directory on a running object server, it doesn't always grab the files at the same time. They're always being written to, and sometimes when we grab them, they're corrupted and we can't use them to start. So if they are corrupted, you can still use the tab files to start up your object server, but you can see that they have a date from a couple months ago, so it could be old data in there. So by using the automatic backup trigger or NCO report to back up to a different directory, then you know that you at least have one good backup from whatever interval you're using for that backup date. Then if you need to restore OMNIbus and you have those files, you can replace all the files, stop the object server, replace all the files within this directory with the masterstore.tab and tablestore.tab from your automatic system backup trigger, and then start the object server. Okay, we have another question. Does it mandatorily be running under PA to do this? No, you don't have to have anything running under the process agent to do this. The trigger, it runs at a set interval, and you can't really dictate how often the trigger runs or set it on a certain cycle. That's the one bad thing about the object server trigger. You can just set it up to run every 24 hours and you know that it's going to happen every 24 hours. If you want to make sure that it happens at a certain time every day, you could also create a script or something in cron that would do the alter system backup command or run NCO report to back it up to a different directory.
And Ramon has asked, should you delete the remaining files when doing that?
Okay, so if you're going to restore the object server, when you shut the object server down, it should only have the 2 tab files within here. But if there is any of these check or log files, you should delete them also and replace them with the backed up masterstore tab and tablestore.tab. They are snapshots, so your event data will be from that time that that backup was taken. Okay. So that's all that I had. Are there any questions about backups? If anyone has any more questions, I'll talk about a couple backup scenarios. So sometimes I get asked, what should I back up when I'm going to be doing a 6-pack install, or what should I back up if I'm doing an upgrade? And you should back up definitely your NC home directory, your installer, be it the deployment engine or the installation manager, the registry of those, and also back up your object server database. You really need all 3 of them. So there's a question, would an NC home include everything from the DB? So it does, but the database is always being written. So let me see if I can pull up my PuTTY window here again. So you can back up just your NC Home and it includes your object server database, but the object server is always being written and we can't guarantee that you can restart it based on these files, because sometimes when you back up, it takes some time to back up these files, especially if they're incredibly large, and the object server is always being written, so you could be copying over files that can't be started up together because they're being written differently. So it's always good to have your object server database backup separate. Now, if something does happen and you can't start your object server from this directory, you could use these 2 tab files, but you can see that they're old. So you could be having to recover from an object server that's a month or so old. So it's better to still back up the object server database separately through the automatic backup trigger or the alter system backup command or NCO OS report, so that you have a snapshot at a regular time. So if you need to, you can go back and recover from that.
There's some more questions coming in. First, what if the checkpoint files and log files happen to get corrupt, all of them, and you have the .tab files created months ago? Can you use that to rebuild the object server?
Yes, you can. You can use those tab files, but like here, it's from months ago. It depends. They're only written when your object server is gracefully shut down. So it depends on how often your object server is restarted, what the date of those files would be, and they would restore your object server from that date, so they'll have very old event data within them. If you have a more recent backup, then you would at least have some of your current events still within it. Tarring up the complete opt-IBM Tivoli directory, will that still be a recommended option? And it is important to back up your NC Home directory, but you still need to have your deployment engine or installation manager backup if it's an install, and also your object server database backup, just because these files, it's always being written. If you just tar up the directory, the files might not be copied in the correct state, and there are times when you can't start your object server from them. So it's still good to have a separate object server database backup that you can restore from.
It actually looks like, yeah. There you go.
Yes, so this is in it's the OmniHome DB, and then the object server name directory is where all of these files, the running object server files are. So if you use the automatic backup trigger, it will create everything in a backup object server name directory. And it's going to be creating my tab files. I set it to run every 24 hours, so it's not going to create them until 24 hours from now. There's another question. Would OS report be a good method to deploy changes in triggers and conversions? You could use OS report for that. What it will do is it will write everything to SQL files. So you would have to go in there and extract out the triggers and the conversions that you wanted to copy over to the other system. Most of the commands in there will create it's a create or replace command that it uses for triggers, I believe. So it should be able to copy it over, and you could run it from NCO SQL or from the SQL interface. I don't know that you would want to go and run NCO OS report. You could run the entire automation SQL against the other object server, but I wouldn't recommend that. I would just go in and view the file and extract out the triggers and conversions that you were interested in.
The question just came in. For DE backup, can you just use the DE backup, DE underscore backup DB, or should you back up the .acsi underscore name directory when doing installs of fix packs?
That's a good question. So you can certainly back up the entire ACSI directory and use the DE backup DB command. The ACSI directory can be quite large. So if you just run the DE backup DB with the backup file, the file that's created is very small. It's just the registry file itself. So you can back up ACSI. You don't have to, because what we can do always, if we have to restore it, is we can install the deployment engine new on the box and then restore the registry through this command. So it's more important to have just the registry than it is to have your entire ACSI directory. Someone's asking how they can have access to this document for future usage. I believe that Jennifer will be sending it out to everyone that registered for the webcast after.
There's another question. Where can I get some documentation on these of these commands and options?
So if you're talking about the DE backup DB command, we do have it documented in the OMNIbus product documentation. There is a section on the deployment engine in the OMNIbus, at least the 7.3.1 and the 7.4 product documentation. The installation manager has its own product documentation, and it also documents how you can do an installation manager restore in there. The documentation on NCO OS report and NCO Compact is also in the OMNIbus core product documentation.
There are a couple more. One, I assume the Redbooks would also would have this documented, and the other one is, again, I guess for the commands and options, he's talking about OS report.
Okay. I haven't seen a Redbook on OMNIbus in a while. There was one a while ago. It was on version 7.3.1, so I don't think that it covered OS report, or it might have covered Compact somewhat. But I don't know of any recent Redbooks on OMNIbus. If anyone knows of any, if you could ping it in the chat. I haven't seen any. But the product documentation does document it, and NCO OS report is in the product documentation also. It's only in 7.3.1 and later, so it would only be in the docs for 7.3.1 and later. Are there any more questions?
At the moment, I see no hands raised or no questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions?
No. All right. Well, to wrap up, I just want to reiterate that it's important to have both your important directories and files, which is your NC Home, and then either Deployment Engine or Installation Manager registry backup of the files that are needed there, and then also an object server database backup, either using NCO OS Report, NCO Compact, or the backup automation, the automatic backup trigger.
Great. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending, and a special thank you to you, Christina, for offering your time and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you, Wade, as well.
Thank you. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Please take a few moments to fill out our post-event survey. Your input is very important to us. This concludes today's conference, and you may now disconnect. Have a wonderful day.